I'm Laura Thomas. I head the creative writing program at the residential college. And again, welcome to our webinar on paths to publishing. Before I introduce our guests, just a couple of housekeeping things. So we are coming to you in a webinar format. What that means is that the panelists can see each other, but we can't see the audience. So if you have a question, we can't see your hand go up in the air, and we can't see the little hand raising thing that Zoom gives us. So if you have a question at any time, just pop it in the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen. And you can go ahead, as soon as that question occurs to you, you can pop it in that Q&A, and I will, when it comes to Q&A time, I will go back to the very beginning and take questions in order. So if John or Allison are talking about something that interests you and you want a follow-up question, don't wait, just go ahead and put it right in the Q&A and we'll get to you in line. So again, welcome everyone. I'm going to read a short introduction here and then we will get to our conversation. So my first and very, very fond memories of Allison Epstein and John Michael Darga involve the writer Jorge Luis Borges and East Quad's old and much beloved Benzinger Library. Back in 2011, under director Angela Dillard's inspiration, the RC was hosting a theme semester on Borges' love poetry. And so one of my favorite RC creative writing program events of all time was the Borges Poetry Flash Fiction Slam. And I have a mini poster from that event, which is of course backwards for you all. And it says it's a poetry flash fiction slam to be judged by a panel of RC student writers for the Borges extravaganza, and it was Friday, December 2nd, 2011. And we also gave the competitors a prompt, and the prompt was to write a poem or piece of flash fiction exploring a personal or world issue whose eloquent solution, and that was Borges' own words, exists, but is hard to find or just out of reach. And some of our suggestions were, is this a broken heart? Is it an act of injustice? Or is it an ordinary solution to an extraordinary problem? So that was the event. Students would read their original work based on Borges and the prompt, and the top winners would earn Borges bucks designed by the incomparably creative Cynthia Burton. So I plastered these posters everywhere all over East Quad, and I couldn't wait to hear our students compete. So when I walked into the lofty, historic Benzinger the evening of the slam, I was not at all surprised to see Allison Epstein among the competitors. I had been working with Allison in tutorial and already knew her to be a creative force to be reckoned with. The panel of RC student writer judges was already seated in front of the open mic. Allison pointed out one of them, the tall guy in the middle, who already had his scoring placards at the ready. That's John Michael Darga, Allison said. He's been wanting to take your tutorial. At that moment, John Michael Darga himself turned, flashed a broad, slightly, well, maybe more than slightly sardonic smile, and waved exuberantly at me. And the rest, as they say, is history. Before long, John too was taking tutorials, and both he and Allison ended their senior year with complete novel manuscripts. Allison's manuscript would go on to be the book that she has just published, A Tip for the Hangman. Both dedicated, thank you, John, both dedicated countless hours to compiling and editing the RC Review, and both volunteered many hours to their literary community, including the Voices of the Middle West Lit Fest held in East Quad for 3 years running. This literary festival was in fact the brainchild of John and the editors of the lit journal Midwestern Gothic, where John was interning at the time. In short, Allison and John embodied everything stellar about the RC and its creative writing program. Talented and dedicated artists, consummate professionals in their roles as editors and organizers, and by the way, generous to their fellow writers. And funny as heck too, as you will learn, I'm sure, in this webinar. Well, so how did that Borges slam turn out? John was a rigorous yet plucky judge. Think Simon Cowell and Paula Abdul all rolled into one. On second thought, don't think that. And how did Allison do? She won first prize for her flash fiction. Her Borges bucks could be turned in for actual cash. Maybe Allison, that was your first paying writing gig all those years ago in East Quad. And I and all of us attending the slam that evening had the pleasure of seeing two outstanding students on their way to becoming professionals. All right, so I'm going to first read Allison and John's bios, and then I believe they're going to read a selection from their creative work before we get on to questions. So Allison Epstein earned her MFA in fiction from Northwestern University and a BA in creative writing from the University of Michigan's Residential College. She now lives in Chicago, where she works as a copywriter. When not writing, she enjoys good theater, bad puns, and fancy jackets. A Tip for the Hangman is her first novel. So congratulations, Allison. That just debuted within the last few weeks, and we're enormously proud. It's a wonderful novel. I've read it. It's great. John Michael Darga is a literary agent at Aevitas Creative Management, where he represents both fiction and nonfiction. He graduated from the University of Michigan with honors with a BA in English and RC Creative Writing, and later attended the Columbia University Publishing Program. Prior to Aevitas, he worked as an editor at Crown, a division within Penguin Random House, and continues to work as a freelance editor. He is currently based in New York City. So Allison, would you like to get us rolling tonight by reading a selection from A Tip from the Hangman?
No, but I will. I will be reading a selection from Allison Epstein's A Tip for the Hangman. Laura,
let him do that, Allison?
I will allow it.
Laura did not prepare us, by the way, that she was going to be saying sweet and sentimental things. If I had known, I would have prepared a sweet and sentimental thing to say about Laura. I do not, but I think the most sentimental thing that I can share is that the dedication page of this book is in fact to Laura Holthane Thomas for setting the scene. If I had my own book, I would point to my own dedication page. I do not, but I share the sentiment. So I'll be reading an excerpt from Allison Epstein's critically acclaimed, and I'm not just like saying that because I'm her friend and we're on this Zoom. It's very legitimately critically acclaimed all across the world. A Tip for the Hangman. Kit had never been inside the master's office. Though he'd accumulated a considerable number of offenses at Cambridge, they had always been minor enough for the fellows to arbitrate themselves. This is my first time reading this aloud. Petty theft, private blasphemy, showing up to recitation with the stink of the alehouse on your breath, wearing the same clothes as the day before. It took something more to earn a summons to this office, something irreversible. The room looked no different from any other modest study. Dark walnut bookshelves lined the walls, packed with volumes in Greek, Latin, and German. 2 tall windows divided the shelves on the far wall. They opened onto a view of the green, where 3 first-form boys tossed a tennis ball, a dying light. Before the window stood a large oak desk, leafy vines carved around the legs and into the sides. Kit could imagine Norgate reading Petrarch's sonnets there or annotating a Latin sermon. A scholar could be happy here, away from the daily irritation of academic affairs. But instead of Norgate, a strange, dark-eyed man leaned his elbows on the desk. Short hair inclining toward gray, beard fastidiously trimmed, hands folded before him in a poor imitation of patience. His eyes, black rather than brown, turned down at the corners like a greyhound's. Kit knew the look in those eyes well enough. It was the look he saw in accountants and lawyers who frequented the same taverns as Cambridge's students, men who made their fortunes on slipped figures and miscalculations. Those eyes knew more about him than he had any cause to expect or any reason to doubt. "Sir," Kit said and bowed. "Marlowe," the man said. His heavy brow and low forehead lent him an air of permanent disapproval. "Yes, sir." Kit rose and glanced at the chair in front of the desk, but the man gave no indication he might sit. "Do you know why you're here?" the man asked. "No, sir," Kit said. "Yes, sir, no, sir." In 20 seconds, the stranger had done what 5 years of university studies could not. He'd taught Kit manners. The man pressed the tips of his fingers together and pointed the resultant triangle at his audience of 1. "My name is Sir Francis Walsingham," he said, "Royal Secretary to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth." "Oh." That's the passage.
I love that passage. I mean, I was so happy to be spending time with Kit again after reading Allison's complete manuscript and falling in love with Kit, and it was like falling in love all over again. So Allison, are you going to let that go unchallenged or what?
Absolutely not. I have a lovely passage of John's fiction that I am looking forward to reading for the group. And I will say there's very few things that are more awkward for a writer than reading your own work. So it is really lovely to hear it from a dear friend, and then also to be able to share my dear friend's prose with you this evening. It's from a short story by John Michael Darga. But then there is also something new in Jenny's words, in the way that they cover him like a blanket. Again, and he remembers that he has felt this way about her before. There is something rich to the way she speaks to him. In this case, a full and textured acceptance. Not pity, which has always tasted to him thin and oily like coffee, or a sort of nervous fear, bitter and gritty grounds. This is luxurious, coating, and it feels like he is on a diet, and this is something that he is not supposed to eat. Good, sinful, guilty. Why are you doing this? He asks, almost to himself, before he realizes he hopes that she can hear him. Before he finishes talking, he realizes, again, what is familiar in her. It's instinct, born from the same adrenaline-spiked urge that makes him lean harder into the interrogation of a bereaved widow, or to leave the room and let the stoically grieving brother sit in silence. It is a recognition of the same. You have it too, she says. It is not his job to fix her. He cannot take this burden on. She is a random from the bar, a one-night stand. He feels warm breath against his neck, condensed like the thick, foggy steam from a shower. She is saying something, and the warmth feels good, so good that the rest of his body breaks out into a small, shuddering shiver, and he feels goose pimples rise like grim soldiers of attention on his arms and neck and back. And he feels her fingers tracing over these new hills of discovery, conquering, and he leans his head back until it lands on hers with a small thunk, like what it must sound like when the worn hull of a ship first makes contact with a foreign shore. She breathes again, and her breath sounds like yes.
That is wonderful. Again, spending time with characters I fell in love with so many years ago. And, that John, that's kind of romantic, kind of hot. Those foreign shores, what can I say? All right. All right, if you both want to unmute, we'll get to our Q&A about how to achieve your dreams as a writer or as a publishing professional. So Allison, I think the first question that everyone would have about, like getting your novel into print, can you describe like how that came about how was your path to publication? What did you do? How did you make that happen?
Yeah, it was a long and winding path to publication, it felt like. 'Cause, I think you mentioned earlier that A Tip for the Hangman was something I worked on with you. That was my senior thesis in the RC. And so we finished the first draft together in 2014, which is 7 years ago now, somehow. And then I kept revising it and kept revising it for years. Writing is rewriting, is rewriting, is rewriting. So there are many drafts in between the one that I worked on with you and the one that actually made it to the next step in the process. But the next phase in the publishing journey is something John has a lot of wonderful insight to, which is finding an agent. So I needed to find a literary agent to work with to help sell my book to publishing houses. And after a winding path to sign with my agent, I ended up doing that in, I believe, 2018, 17 or 18. We did some revisions together. She had some really good suggestions for ways to make the book more marketable and kind of make it structurally hold together in ways that it wasn't really doing at the time. And then after about a year of going back and forth with revisions with her, we started sending it out to different editors all over the publishing industry. And there's a lot of waiting, a lot of waiting for emails, a lot of anxiously refreshing your inbox, wondering when someone's going to get back to you. And then after a while being on submission, we got an email back from an editor at Doubleday, which is part of Penguin Random House. And she originally said, "This is very close and I would almost like to buy it." She asked us to do what's called a revise and resubmit, which is when you take some editorial notes that the editor has, you go back and you make some fixes, you rewrite some things, you send it again, and then now that they're already kind of interested in it, they'll take a second look and say, yes, I'd like to buy this, or no, I wouldn't, after all. And fortunately, she liked the fixes that we made and she said yes. And so we signed a contract with Doubleday. There were more revisions. There's always more revisions. And then about a year and a half or so after I signed with the publisher, the book actually made it out into the world. And that was 5 weeks ago as of today. So it's all still very fresh.
Congratulations, Allison. That is a winding path indeed. One quick follow-up question. What was the nature of the revisions? I mean, if you could describe the revisions you were asked to make, especially when the editor initially said, okay, do a revise and resubmit. What were they looking for there? Is there an easy way to answer that, or was it a lot of little things, or?
There is an easy-ish way to answer that, and it's I had set myself a pretty big structural problem with this book in that the way that the timeline stretches means that the pacing of the book is really difficult to balance. And so the editor had some feedback on that. I was aware that that had been an issue in the past, and she kind of pointed to the place where it wasn't quite working yet and said, if can you address this specific pacing issue? Do you think you can fix this? And so for me, I've always really liked getting super pointed direct feedback like that. It's so much more useful than an editor saying, it just didn't really work for me. It just wasn't the book for me. This was a thing I could fix. So that was really nice.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm sure there's going to be more follow-up questions. We already have one follow-up question, but before I pose the one in the chat, John, I wanted to turn to you and just, can you sort of describe the path to publication from the agent's perspective? What does that look like from your end of things now that Allison has shared the writer's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's much the same, because there's nothing that we're hiding or obfuscating from the author. So I think we're pretty transparent, and the process is much the same. The only difference is that we are the ones who are having the authors turn in the manuscript and saying, is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? And reading it and providing feedback and saying, one more round, and then one more round, and then we're the ones kind of cracking the whip and making them do more revisions. I have a lot of clients who say, when they turn their submission back, they say, look, I'm always, if you don't think it's ready yet, of course I'm going to put the time in, of course I'm going to put the energy in to revise this again. We'll do what we need to do. But oh my God, I hope this is the last revision. It's really, what Allison was saying about the revision process is really true. It's not at all uncommon for me to do 3 or 4 or 5 rounds of edits on a project that I'm working on. And that's just me. That's not counting with the editor once it gets to the publishing house, or a revise and resubmit, which are, I think, a lot more common now, even than they were 5 years ago. A lot of people do revise and resubmits. That's not counting the editing that's done beforehand. So it's a lot of editing, it's a lot of revising. And part of the journey is that, every editor and every agent will probably have a slightly different take on what they like about the book and what they think needs to change about the book to make it work. And a lot of the process is for the writer, I think, is about hearing those different perspectives, and saying, this is the vision that aligns most closely, or maybe this is a vision that I didn't think of before, but now it really resonates with me. So it's the same process, we just shepherd it. And a lot of times, Allison, I don't know if your agent shared pass notes with you throughout the process, or if they kind of like sheltered you from those. But a lot of times it's bearing the emotional brunt of things, because a lot of authors don't want to see their pass notes from publishing houses. A lot of authors, once it's done, it's done. And if they see that feedback from editors, they're going to get in their head, and they're going to rethink, and they're going to start wondering about things. So a lot of it is, shielding the author and getting all of these pass notes from publishing houses, and kind of figuring out the best way to protect your author emotionally. Because even if your book is published and wildly successful and is award-winning and best-selling, the majority of editors you send it to are going to pass. I mean, that's just the facts. That's the numbers of the publishing industry. Passing does not equate to a subpar manuscript or anything like that. It's all subjective, but you know, it's managing that and managing the author's expectations and making sure that the author never gets too down about things, and, you know, kind of keeping their spirits up. And people always say that agents are like a cross between an editor and a therapist, and I think that's probably pretty accurate.
So I wanted to ask Allison, did you, let me ask a follow-up, John, first, and then I'll ask Allison. So same question as I asked Allison, is there a quick answer to what kinds of revisions that you as the agent are likely to request from an author, or does it really vary widely? You know, can you give us a sense of that?
It varies pretty widely. I will not request edits if I don't have a clear vision for, you know, there are a lot of books that you read and you think this is not quite there yet, and I don't know how to bring it to where it needs to be. I'm sure people in the audience experience that when they read a published book and they're like, I don't really love this book, but I don't know how I would have made it better. We get that a lot when we get manuscripts in on submission. Like Allison said, a lot of times it's pacing. A lot of times you have a manuscript that's 100,000 words and you kind of go, oh, this should be 80,000 words, or you can cut this character, or this spot drags. I just had an R&R conversation with an author last week where there were, I think, 4 main kind of set piece scenes in the book. And I said it needs to be 3 set piece scenes. So we had a whole phone call about how to remove one of those scenes and then restructure the back half of the book so that there were 3 scenes, you know, 3 big kind of moment scenes instead of 2. It mostly comes down to pacing. I think that's kind of the root of all evil. In a big picture edit, you know, there are, as you both know, line edits, which is where an editor will basically turn on track changes and, you know, futz around with things like dialogue or wording, or, you know, cut this paragraph here and bump it up there. But most editors don't do that until all of the big picture stuff has been put into place. So okay, mostly pacing, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like both of you are really landing on pacing. That's interesting. And Allison, as a follow-up, did you look at your past notes from?
Yeah, I want to know.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I said I only wanted to see good news. And so in the first couple of months of being on submission, my editor only sent me feedback that it had some nice positive things in it, even if it was a pass. But we were on submission for a while and the silence started to feel worse than the passes. So after a couple of months, I said, can you send me the bad ones just so I know that someone's looking at it? So it depends. There's emotional pain on both sides.
And I guess this is for both of you as one more follow-up to this before I go into the chat for a couple of questions. Did you use, either of you, the past notes to make substantive changes at that point? I guess, John, do you use past notes from the editor to ever approach the author and say, look, we're consistently getting this kind of feedback. Do we need to address this? And
yeah,
you would answer too. Yeah.
So there are 2 kinds of pass notes. There's like a standard pass note that says, this is not for me, and here is why. Sometimes they'll say, try me with the author's next book. You know, I really like their writing, but something about this particular book didn't land with me. But, you know, if this doesn't sell, try me on the next one. And then there's what Allison is describing, which is a very specific ask, which is an R&R, which is the the editor specifically saying, make these changes, and then please send it to me again because I would like to consider this. In the industry, if an editor passes but does not, it's kind of like you have to ask for it to trigger an R&R. It's kind of, if you're desperate, you can say, you wrote such a glowing pass note and we revised it. Would you be willing to see it again? But you're really not supposed to hit them up again on the same novel if they didn't specifically request an R&R. So usually it's feedback that you can integrate into the author's next work, but it's kind of a little too late for the work that's currently on submission.
Yeah, I'll add one caveat to that if I can. I feel like this hasn't happened to me because most of the feedback that I got was this isn't for me, or we already bought something like this and there's not much feedback it's not much revision you can do with feedback like that. But I have had writer friends get feedback from several editors in a row that say this character isn't working or this plot point is unbelievable. And at that point, I've seen writers go back and revise the book before putting together a new round of editors to send it to.
Yeah,
You would never send it back to the same editor if they don't ask for it. That's kind of frowned upon. But if you've sent it to 10 people and 8 of them say there's a problem with this, I think a writer and an agent might decide, let's do some more revisions together before we send it out to 10 more people to take a look.
so I don't know how interesting this is. I won't spend a long time on this in case it bores people, but there are like kind of two styles of submission for agents. There are 24 possible editors who might buy this book. Let's send it to all 24 of them, and hopefully 2 will bite, and then we'll have an auction. There's also the style where you chunk that 24 up into like 6 in the first round, 4 in the second round, 5 in the third round, and you use the feedback that you receive from those first 6. Maybe all 6 passed, but maybe they gave you feedback that you then go back and revise the manuscript again before going out to the next 6 or something like that. So you can do that, and that is a particular agenting style. It depends on the agent and the book and the client and all of that. But
right, that's the style that my agent had, so that's how we went about it.
That seems wise, and that's what writers will often do with lit journals. If they've got 50 lit journals that they like to submit stories to, they might do 5 or 7 at a time and see what kind of response they get. Okay, awesome. Thank you for those complete answers. So we have a couple of questions in the chat about finding an agent. So Allison, I'll let you field this first, and then John, maybe you can weigh in. One question is, how did you find an agent? How did you choose? And then another question asks, what does the process look like when it comes to searching or choosing what literary agents to apply to work with? How do you know where to start? What's the first step? So both of these questions are really, can you walk us through the steps of how to find an agent? And Allison, maybe, of course, since you were successful in landing an agent, how did you go about doing that?
Sure. Yeah. It can feel relatively overwhelming thinking about how am I going to find a literary agent who wants to read my work. I know when I had a manuscript that I was ready to send out, that it's a big mental hurdle to get yourself over to be ready to start looking. But the plus side of it is agenting is not a super huge business. It's not like you're trying to find an accountant out of an entire country of accountants who want to work with you. Agenting is a pretty self-contained field, and it's also relatively easy to find online. So if you start looking at reputable literary agencies, you go on their website, you see, oh, there are these 8 agents who have their profiles listed on their website. They all kind of have a description of the kinds of projects that they like to work with, the kinds of books that interest them, the kinds of stories they like to tell, and the books that they already represent. And so when you've got that kind of information, you can see, oh, this agent represents historical fiction. They're looking for new authors. They represent this writer who I really love. I think they might be a good fit. It's kind of a long research process to find a list of people who you think might be good to send to. I know I am a spreadsheet person, and so I definitely had my looking for agent spreadsheet going, trying to find the right fit, because you don't want to waste your time querying an agent with your manuscript if they're not at all interested in the kind of books that you write. You can't just start sending out materials to an agent if you write adult fantasy and they only represent middle grade nonfiction. That's not going to be a good use of anybody's time. So a lot of it is doing your homework. And then I think John will have some good insights on this too on the other side, but the actual process of querying an agent, that's the term for it, when you put together essentially a really short, punchy pitch of your novel to try and get the agent interested in what you write, and then usually a handful of pages for them to get a sense of the writing. I think most of the agents I saw were asking for the first 3 chapters or 30 pages, about that much. And so then you send those materials over to the agent unsolicited. You just kind of email them through their work email and you cross your fingers and you wait. And if they're interested, they'll follow up with you. they might ask for the full manuscript to read the whole thing, and then they'll let you know, I'd love to work with you on this, or very often if you get no response, that's a no. Because I mean, agents are incredibly busy, and you can imagine how many people are sending them manuscripts out of the blue every day. There's no way on this earth that they could respond to every query that they get. Um, One thing that I did to get an agent, and it's a newer thing that's kind of I'm seeing it more and more commonly now, is Twitter pitch events for agents. I love Twitter. It's where all of my free time goes. So on specific days on Twitter, they'll designate, you know, on the third Thursday of November or whatever it is, there'll be a specific hashtag that you can use in your tweets, and you send out your tweet that's a pitch of your book, short enough to be in a tweet with that hashtag, and then agents can go on Twitter and scroll through that hashtag and find all of these different pitches that writers have sent out. And if they like your tweet with the pitch, then you can go ahead and send them the pages, and you kind of have a personal connection and an in through that. Um, I've heard mixed feedback about how effective it is. I don't think it's any more or less effective than just sending a normal email, but that is how I connected with my agent, was through one of those events. So I personally have found them helpful.
Allison, I will say that as recently as last week, I shared your query letter as a sterling example of a successful query, and students noticed right away that you were responding to the PitMad like that you had gotten from this particular agent. So congratulations on that. I mean, your tweets were fabulous. I mean, that's another thing that I think folks want to understand is you have to write the book, but then you also really do have to have some marketing chops, to make this, small, to condense your book into these tweets and, attract that attention. So bravo on that. That was masterful. John, can you give us your, rundown on that? How do we get you as an agent?
I totally forgot the initial question that was asked. I was just listening rapt to Allison. Everything Allison said was very smart, which is, I think, the first time I've said that. For background, Allison and I have like a lovely frenemy relationship, which is why we cast snark at each other. I just realized with no context that sounds incredibly rude. I think everything she said was right. We do read truly every. I mean, I can't speak for every single agent operating, but for me personally and for all the agents that I know and work with, we do read everything that comes in on submission, because that's how we find our work. You're not just sending it into the black hole ether. She's also right that we don't respond to everything. I tabulated it out recently, and if I sent a response to every submission that I received, even if it was just a very fast, like personalized, thank you so much, but no, because X, it would take a full workday out of my week. I would have to devote an entire 9 to 5 workday just to say no to people. And I would love to do that. Just to kind of be a little more personal about it, because I think every agent appreciates being trusted and wanting to be trusted with the work. But we need to spend that time on our clients and on our current projects. The PitMad was one of the Twitter events that Allison was talking about. Some agents participate, some don't. I think you'll find that agents kind of pop in and pop out depending on how busy they are at any given time. But it is a guaranteed way to, if somebody likes your tweet and you tweet about your book, then that's at least a guaranteed way to get them to read your pages. I think a lot of people are scared about the query letter. I think it always helps me to think about a query letter as a first draft of, if you open a book, the flap copy is this. It's the description of the book that you read that's either on the flap or on the back. Think of your query letter as the flap copy. It's roughly 3 paragraphs that describe the setup and, kind of end with a ... that makes you want to read the book. I think a lot of people think of a query letter as a all-encompassing synopsis of the book where they kind of have to cram everything in and get this subplot and this character. One of the examples that I love to use when talking about query letters is if you look at the flap copy for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, they don't mention Ron and Hermione. They don't mention like any of the characters except like Harry, and then you have Voldemort. And I think that's a great way to think about a query letter. Ron and Hermione are integral to Harry Potter. They are main characters. They're not in the descriptive copy because you need to fit it in 3 paragraphs. So think about what the core of your story is and how you can convey the core of the story in that length. That's kind of my main tip on query letters is to leave the reader wanting more, and you don't have to fit everything in. I mean that's a good query letter is really how I think a lot of agents will read sample pages even if the query letter is amiss, just because it's a really hard form to nail, and I personally don't ever want to miss out on a really good manuscript just because the author had trouble grasping that very like one specific form of a query letter. So I always dip into the manuscript pages. So, and I know a lot of other agents do, so that might also help people kind of feel a little better, is that even if you don't nail your query letter 100%, an agent will probably still dip into the manuscript just to see what you're writing on in the manuscript is. So it's important. Don't shove it off to the side, but it is not necessarily the end all be all. And there are many examples of query letters online. I think you can just Google how to write a query letter and you'll find many examples.
And John, before we go on to the next question, just from a practical standpoint, could you reel off, just so we mentioned PitMat as being something, are there a couple of databases you would recommend that folks turn to for agent research?
Absolutely. The main one is querytracker.com. I don't know if it's .com. It might be, I think it's .com. It might be like a .org or net or whatever. But Query Tracker is kind of the big massive database where every agent lives, unless an agent can request that their information be removed. That would be a reason why someone's not on, but otherwise every agent's on there. And it's kind of a live journal where people post about their querying experiences. So people will post when they queried an agent, when they heard back from the agent, what the agent said when they wrote back, if they requested a full, how long it took them to read the full. It's kind of a living organism where writers log their experiences with agents, whether it's good or it's bad. Query Tracker is a really valuable resource to use to root out what we call schmagents, which are agents who are not necessarily on the up and up in the industry. If you find a string of posts on Query Tracker that kind of have bad experiences with an agent, that's a red flag. Query Tracker is one, and then there's a print, I should get the ebook too. There's a print book that is published by, I think, Writer's Digest every year that is a print guide to agents, to literary agents, and they have a new edition every year that's updated with either new agents or if agents retired. And that is kind of, it's not only not a dictionary, like an encyclopedia or a direction where you can go flip through by agency, and it has all the genres they represent and whether you query them by snail mail or email, or there's an online form. It has all that in there, but it also walks you through the querying process and gives you examples of query letters and all of that. So I think those two are probably the ones that come to mind. Our Query Tracker and if you go to Amazon, don't buy it from Amazon. I don't know if I can say that. Don't buy it from Amazon, but buy it from your local indie bookstore. But if you go on Google and type in guide to literary agents, you'll find a couple publications probably that you can use as a resource.
Okay, terrific, thank you. We have quite a few questions in the chat, so I'll just go down the list. Either of you can answer this, although I imagine, John, this might be a better question for you. Do literary agencies work with poets as well, or is it mainly fiction and nonfiction? Are there any differences in the publishing journey between these areas?
Yeah, I can answer that. We do work with poets. A lot of time we don't, for two reasons. One is because It probably will not shock anyone listening that poetry is not one of the more lucrative forms of publishing. It tends to be on the lower end in terms of money, until either you're a Roscoe or a Ada Limon or someone. A lot of times, and a lot of the poetry publishers are smaller independent publishers who allow for poets to submit their manuscripts themselves. So one of the roles of an agent is to submit their clients' work to publishing houses, to which an author cannot submit themselves. So Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, Macmillan, all of those, an author cannot submit directly to that publisher. A lot of poetry publishers you can directly submit if you're the poet, and so a lot of poets don't want to give an agent a traditional agent commission is 15% of all monies received on the work, and a lot of poets do not want to give up 15% of what is already a lower amount of money, when they can submit themselves and kind of facilitate that process themselves. So we do poetry. A lot of poets just kind of choose to forego it on their own. Was there another part of the question, Laura?
No, I think that's perfect. Allison, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Nope, and I'm really glad John took that one.
I think that was a great one for John. All right, the next question is for the both of you. So Allison, maybe I'll have you field this first and then John. This questioner writes, I have queried agents before and have had several agents ask for the manuscript and then decline, but ask to see my next project. From the writers and Allison, and then John from the agents, and do you have any advice for what sorts of improvements or changes they might be looking for, or in a simpler sense, what should be either included or omitted in a good query letter? Like, how do you navigate that whole, deal with that? Did you ever run up against that, Allison, where they were like, oh yeah, but let's see your next one, this one isn't for us, and how did you, kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I had a few agents who said that to me, this book isn't right, but if you have another one, I'd be happy to see it. And we had a couple of editors in the submission process that said that too. This book isn't something that fits our list right now. It's not something we can sell, but if you have another book, give us a shout. And I will say there's a tendency in the writer brain to say, oh, they're just saying that to be nice and to dismiss it. That's not true. They will not say that unless they mean it. This is true for literary journals. This is true for agents. This is true for editors. If they say send us more things, send them more things and remind them when you do that they said send you more things, because that will punt your query to the top of the pile if they say, oh, I remembered this person and I did want to see more from them. That is a real ask, and that is not, they're not just saying that to be polite. If they didn't give specific feedback on why they passed on the project, it's hard to generalize and say, oh, it's usually a structural problem or it's usually a pacing problem. It could be they liked your style and they liked your voice, but this story just didn't speak to them. It just wasn't the right book for them. And so maybe they do just want to see what's the next thing you do. Maybe that'll connect with me better. If they did give you specific notes, definitely take those notes into consideration. They're giving you that advice for free, so don't toss it. But yeah, I think being asked to submit more is a win in itself.
Okay, thank you. John, do you want to weigh in on that from?
I mean, once again, Allison said all correct things. She really nailed it. I will reiterate again, you probably saw my emphatic reaction, but nobody in the publishing industry asks to see things again unless they want to see things again. We don't have the time to read things that we don't want to read. I mean, that's just the bare fact. So if we ask to see something again, it's because we want to read it, we want to spend the time with it, which is meaningful. I think this is I don't know if Allison, you received any of these past notes when you saw them for your book. It's something that I use and something that editors use a lot, which is people will say that they enjoyed reading something as a reader, but they don't have a vision for it as an editor. And what that means is that there are so many steps in publishing to take it from manuscript to finished book on the shelves, and you have to weigh in on what the title should be, what the cover will look like, obviously the editing process that we talked about, which stores should be targeted for it, which newspapers or podcasts or newspaper, I guess the newspapers, magazines, you should target for ads, or to have the author promote the book. There are all these different steps, and an agent or an editor will not always have the background or the vision for, here's the manuscript, here's the newspaper they do their interview with, here's the person you pitch it to at Barnes and Noble, here's what the cover looks like, this is the perfect title for it. Sometimes you genuinely read a book and you think, this is very good, but I don't see those next steps to get this to a published book. There are some things that you just enjoy as a reader. I mean, and that goes for published books as well. Like I'm just picking something off the shelf at random, but like I love reading Donna Tartt. Like I think she's a fantastic author. I would have zero clue to know where to start editing Donna Tartt because she's so intricate and threaded. So like in that case, I would say if Donna Tartt queried me, I would say, I love your work. I will buy this book when it's out. I'm a reader for this. I'm not the agent for it. So that just genuinely means that you, not even that you didn't connect to the writing enough, but just that you don't know how to work with the author to shape the book into that final form. So when an agent says, this is not for me, but try me with your next one, I think what they're kind of trying to get at is, I don't have the vision for how to take this to a published book on the shelf, but I really think you're talented, and maybe I will have that vision for the next one. I don't know if, again, as Allison said, if they have specific feedback, then they will say that feedback, and if they want to see your work again, they will specifically request a revise and resubmit.
That was a very insightful answer. John, I didn't ask you this before, it's an oversight, but can you tell us what types of genres do you represent? So what do you have a vision for?
That's a great question, Laura. I thought, and I learned this lesson the hard way. I opened myself, I'm a very omnivorous reader. And I opened myself up to basically every genre under the sun. When I first started agenting, I was like, send me everything. And then I read, like, it took me a few, fantasy manuscripts, and it took me a few science fiction manuscripts, and it took me a few, thriller manuscripts before I was kind of like, oh, I don't know what to, like, I don't know what to do with these to bring these to publication. So I would say upmarket commercial is kind of where my fiction tastes are right now. So if you think of, honestly, like rom-coms, like that's a sweet spot for me right now, just because of the pandemic, and I think we all want joyous things to take us through the pandemic. I do a few literary fiction that kind of ruminate on art and family and the good things like that. Those are a little more hit or miss for me, but it's kind of like when you know. But yeah, I would say I'm not to like drill, but I'm like really into rom-coms right now. That's what gets me going, and I will probably be open to other things later. But I would say the hard genre, like fantasy, sci-fi, thriller, that kind of stuff, I don't know what to do with as much. And to be honest, historical fiction. Like I really enjoyed reading Allison's book as a reader. Allison is a great example of an author who would have queried me, and I would have read her manuscript and said, love this, go with God, I don't know what to do with it. Because historical fiction is such a very specific and careful and calculated area of publishing that involves so much accuracy, and I don't know that I have the patience to work that closely with that level of accuracy. That's my short answer.
That's a great, that's a very insightful answer. And I really appreciated how you shared, sort of your agent's journey about, okay, so what is it do I really want to represent, and how you winnowed that down. There are more questions in the chat, but I'm actually going to follow up with a question from my notes for Allison, because we're on this topic. Of course, A Tip for the Hangman is historical fiction. And I also know from having read the novel and also having the fabulous privilege of working with you on the rough draft and sort of getting into your process way back in the day, you know, obviously it's historical fiction, but you did take some license, you know, with the facts in creating Kit's character. So my question for you as a genre writer of historical fiction, at what point in your creative process did you seriously begin to think about like historical fiction as a genre and the fact that when you did approach an agent, you were going to have to sell this to them or pitch it to them, let's say, as historical fiction? And then once you did find your agent, were there further steps in sort of tailoring it to the market? And of course, I'm asking you specifically about historical fiction, but I think this could apply to any, you know, rom-com or sci-fi, speculative or whatever. So can you just say, like, when did you start thinking about your work as historical fiction? At what point? Was that pretty early on? And when did you start to think about the market for that while you were composing?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question, and it's come up a lot now that more people than just me and my agent and my editor are reading the book, and we're kind of getting a sense of where does it fall in the larger genre. And the way I think about historical fiction as a genre is that there's kind of two approaches to it, and one is what John was saying earlier, which is this has to be 100% accurate, and you better be able to pull up a map from this era and zoom in and look at the floor plan of this building and make sure that building really looks like this at this time. And then there's the other opposite end of the spectrum, which is more like an alternate history where you are inspired by facts, but you take some license and you imagine what might have happened, what would have been interesting if this happened. And I think I had a sense where on that scale I wanted to fall when I started writing the book. The aspects of the story that really pulled me in were things that I was imagining, what if this happened? And so I wanted it to be really grounded in fact, but I wanted to take some more liberties with it, as you said. And so during the writing, that's kind of all I needed to know is I needed to know what kind of book am I writing and where do I want it to fit in my imagination of what a historical fiction novel is. It's a different conversation when you're trying to sell it to an agent, and then the agent has to explain to a publisher who has to put it on a bookshelf in Barnes and Noble somewhere, what section is this going to be in? What are the category tags we're going to use on Amazon? So for me, it was really important that the agent that I signed with really understood the kind of historical fiction that I was writing and knew how to explain it to an editor. I queried several agents who wanted it to be a kind of historical fiction book that it wasn't. And so it wasn't that they were wrong, it's that we had different visions for what we wanted the book to be, and they weren't a good fit for the book that I wanted to sell. And so when I found my agent, she understood right away, okay, I see what kind of alternate history thing you're trying to do here and I'm into it. Let's make it better. And so that was really important to me. And then where I was doubly blessed is that my editor also had the same vision and she said, "Yes, I get what you're doing and I love it and I would like to buy it." And so it's really having a clear sense of what you want it to be. And then for me, I didn't want to compromise on that. I think other other manuscripts you might be a little bit more willing to say, "Oh, the market is responding weirdly to this specific element that doesn't fit more naturally in the genre. Maybe I should edit this. This isn't super important to me and it's making it a hard sell. Maybe I should make some changes." And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think because I've made plenty of changes based on things that agents and editors said to me. Just for me, the place in the genre wasn't one of them.
Okay, that's an excellent answer. And we have a couple of other questions about genres, so I'll get back to the chat and we might come back to that. But that was something I really wanted to know is, you know, what your concept of historical fiction is and how closely you adhered to your original vision and where you maybe responded to critiques along the way. So thank you for that. There was a question that I think dated back to John when you were talking about the process of approaching editors with manuscripts. This questioner asked, "What do you mean when you say have an auction with publishing companies? What does that mean?"
I'll be brief in this answer because I think it will probably be not very interesting to a lot of people. But when a publisher says we would like to publish this book, they offer the author what is called an advance, which is a sum of money that is paid out in parts, usually on signing of the contract, delivery of the manuscript, and publication of the book. And there are a lot of various parts of that offer. So a lot of people just think of it as the money that you're offered, but there's also royalties that you earn on the books, and whether the publisher has the rights to sell it in North America or all across the world but in English, or when you sell an excerpt of the book to People Magazine, which is a weird, because I'm thinking of Tip from the Hangman, and like an excerpt of Tip from the Hangman and People Magazine. People Magazine will pay a certain amount of money to run the excerpt from the book. How much of that money goes to the publisher? How much of that money goes to the author? There are all these little things in a contract that pan through. And so when you have, let's say, 3 editors who are interested in publishing the book and acquiring the book, they will all put forward slightly different offers. So they'll offer slightly different amounts of money, or slightly different payouts, or slightly different royalty rates. Excuse me. And that is an auction. So that when you collect all those different offers from the different publishing houses, and you take them to the author and you say, here is what we have on the table. What would you like to do? You can counter offer sometimes. And sometimes the author takes a lower offer, or an offer that's not as good, because they just love that publisher and they love that editor so much. But you can basically think of it like an eBay auction, where the book is the Beanie Baby on sale on eBay, and all of the publishers are typing their offers into the slot, and the one that puts in the most money by the deadline usually wins.
If I can throw one comment on the end of that, for all of the things John was talking about, those little tiny moving pieces, the North American serial rights in the English language, that's why you want an agent as a writer. As the writer, I want to sit at home and work on the book. I don't understand any of those contract details, and it's not my job. It's my agent's job to go through the contract and say, this is a good deal, this is a bad deal, here's what this means. It is a huge advocate to have in your corner when your job is not to understand publishing contracts. Your job is to write the book.
There's like no better feeling as an agent to get, an offer, and you can kind of tell the author, like, don't worry about it. Like, I'll deal with, like, this is not up to snuff, but like, we'll get it up to snuff. So just like, let me work, and I'll come back to you with something better.
It sounds like your agent can also point out, if, there are more considerations besides who's offering the most money. It sounds like, yeah. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So
there are things like author approvals too, where like sometimes you can, if you're good in a contract, you can get the author approval over the title and the cover art and the flap copy and the catalog copy. And sometimes it's mutual approval where the publisher and author have to agree. And sometimes it's just what's the term? Sometimes they just have to consult with the author, but the final choice rests with the publisher. So those are all different things that you weigh with the offer, and that hopefully an agent will be able to get the author more favorable terms.
Well, that's good to know. I know that authors are often concerned about how much control they may or may not have over the book cover. So it sounds like that's something, that can be.
We try to get as much as possible. Usually the standard contractual, and again, this is like probably getting too into it, but the standard contractual language is usually meaningful consultation, which means that the author like has to be consulted. They have to go through certain rounds with the author, but the decision ultimately is with the publisher.
Yeah, I guess what meaningful means is, maybe.
And that is when, that's when you have an author who hates the cover the publisher chose, and the agent goes to the publisher and debates the meaning of the word meaningful. The legal meaning of the word meaningful. We have had many of those arguments.
John, like you've had meaningful conversations about the meaning of the word meaningful.
Consultation.
So
yeah.
Good for you. So the next question on this topic too is, how expensive is it generally to have an agent? So maybe John and Allison, you can weigh in on like how agents make their money.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing first, just as a warning to the writers in the audience, is that you should never pay to work with an agent. you should never be writing a check out of your own bank account to work with a literary agent. And if they are asking you to wire them money, that should be an immediate red flag. The way that an agent gets paid is John mentioned earlier, they take a commission out of the money that you make on your book sales. So when I sold my book to Doubleday, I was given an advance and my agent took 15% of that advance. I never had to write a check. I'll let John talk about the rest of it, but that you hear a lot of writers asking, should I pay this money for someone to look at my book? And the answer is almost always no.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The cost of an agent is $0, because I mean, we are taking a 15% commission off of what you receive, but you would, the theory is that you would not have that money without the agent to make the ins with the publisher and negotiate. So it's, yeah. And when I spoke earlier, when on Query Tracker and everything, when you look for schmagents who, if an agent requests money for something or wants money up front, that is a schmagent. I will say, just to make sure that's delineated, that is very different, obviously, from a freelance editor and paying any freelancer to look at and work on your book. That is totally legit. And, sometimes an agent will say that your book, needs another round of editing, and maybe you choose to hire a freelance editor to edit your book before you resubmit to the agent or do an R&R or something. That's a totally separate thing, because that's a separate employee that you're hiring to work on your book. But the agent themselves, we don't get paid until you get paid. Is the bottom line. I make zero money until my authors get money.
So if an agent, again, just to reiterate for our audience, if an agent charges you a reading fee, that is not what we do. Yeah, that is an unethical ask.
Yes.
I will also say that I think that from the writer's perspective, it is important to remember that if you're getting frustrated by agents not responding in a timely way, or, maybe the no response means no, or what have you, agents are working on spec basically until they sell your book and get that commission. So John and Allison both, a lot of the editing that you describe that you do with your authors is being done on spec. I mean, you are banking on the fact or risking your time and talent, John, from the agent's point of view, in being able to sell that book, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had projects where I've done 3 or 4 rounds of edits on the manuscript, and it has not sold, or it's sold for an amount that is not, that does not equate to, if you break down the hours I spent editing the manuscript and pitching it to publishers and negotiating the contract and all of that, the commission does not break down to minimum wage on that book. And the hope is that you sell enough projects that sell for big money and enough projects that sell for low money that it evens out and makes a living in the end. But that's why, that comes down to when you say, I like this book, but I don't have a vision for it. That's why it's so important, because you need to work as an agent. You need to take on and work on a book that, even if you spend all that time and all that energy on the book and make $0, it is still worth it to you at the end of the day to have worked on that book and to have tried and to have poured that time and energy into it for literally nothing, truly nothing. And that's why we have to be really selective about our projects, because every single one of my manuscripts, even if it doesn't sell, is something that I am proud to have worked on and that I think was worth my time. And so, yeah, we just have to be really, really careful about how we spend that time, because it's all spec.
Yeah, and that's in the view of writers, that's why your agent is your rock star. It's a really hard relationship to build. The querying process and trying to land an agent is a big hurdle, but once you get an agent who believes in your work and is willing to go to bat for you and is by your side every step of the way when their success is your success, there's almost no other writing relationship like that. That's your person who you can trust to represent you and who understands what you're trying to do. So I know there tends to be some skepticism from writers like, why should I be giving an agent my money? I'm the one who wrote the book. No, they're earning their commission.
And getting an agent is no guarantee that the book will sell, no matter how good your agent is. And I've got a couple of questions here. First, I'll do the genre question, then we'll move on. We have several questions about the query letter. So, but first, let's do this genre question. And I think both of you could feel this, honestly. What if your novel crosses genres? You know, and maybe an agent, you know, says that they accept one genre but not the other. You know, what do you do with cross genre work?
Hmm. I think you can usually get a good sense of what an agent's point of view on genre is by the kind of books that they already represent. If you look at the authors that they represent in the one genre that you're crossing over into, and they're doing something kind of experimental or interesting, or you're into that work, there's a good chance that the agent will also like what you're doing. And I think it's worth flagging it in your query letter that if you're writing a um I cannot think of for the life of me 2 genres of a book right now, but if you're
Fantasy thriller.
thank you. If you're writing a fantasy thriller and this person only represents fantasy, you might say it's got some thriller elements and like don't try and hide it. But if you think it has some resonance with what they're doing, I think it's still worth leaning into that. John, do you have any thoughts on crossover?
It's a really tricky subject, and it almost, I almost don't think that you can give a pat answer for that, because it does vary. So like in fantasy thriller, like just throwing that out as an example, you can have a thriller that is set in a fantasy world that is primarily a thriller, and that, you know, maybe it's I'm literally just pitching The Hobbit. I was like, maybe it's a bunch of dwarves trying to steal gold from a dragon. That's The Hobbit. I just sold The Hobbit. You know, maybe it's a bunch of dwarves trying to steal gold from a dragon, and that it's a thriller, but it's set in a fantasy world, and that's maybe thriller with fantasy. Or it could be fantasy with thriller, where there's this whole magical ecosystem with creatures and sorcery, and the infrastructure of this fantasy world is integral to how the thriller aspect plays out. So it kind of depends on which element is crucial to the book, and what editorial skills you need. I mean, I don't want to speak without knowing the work itself. It's possible the work is a true 50-50 split. That's its own situation, but I think it would be good in that situation to look at maybe which of the two genres takes press prevalence. And then if the agent does not represent that genre, so like if you pitch me with a fantasy thriller, I would know how to edit it if it was a thriller set in a fantasy world. If it was a fantasy with thriller elements, I wouldn't know how to do that world building and to set up, again, that, you know, say there's like a magic, I wouldn't know how to organize the rules of that magic system and integrate it throughout the plot. That's not my skill set. So even using that one term, I would be familiar with and able to work on one type and not the other type. So if it's possible, identify which genre kind of rises to the top a little bit more and use that as your, I'm blanking on the term, the divining rod for how you're focusing this and who you're querying.
Okay, thank you. Those were excellent answers to kind of a pesky problem, I think. Okay, so let's get into the query letter. A couple of questions. Query letter tips, I have zero clue how to do that. Another question is there some kind of etiquette for query letters that we should be aware of? So what say you about the persnickety query letter?
Yeah. When I started querying agents, I did not know how to write a query letter. It's not a skill that's really taught it's something that you kind of have to pick up while you're doing it. And so the first thing that I did when it was time for me to start querying my manuscript is I Googled how to write a query letter. And I think every writer who tries to sell a book has done that Google search before. And there are tons of really great templates out there. Most of the time, your query follows the same basic structure. It reminds me a lot of a job cover letter in that it's very formulaic. You don't want it to be too short, but you do want to show that you've done your research and you know who you're speaking to and why you're a good fit for them. So essentially, your query letter is, "Hello, agent. I am I know XYZ about you, and therefore I think my project would be a good fit for you." And then you go into what John was saying earlier, kind of your 3 paragraph hook into your manuscript. What's this book about? Why would someone want to read it? You don't need to go into all of the details, but what you really want to do is make the catchiest, most interesting elevator pitch for your book that you can. And then also including some more um, rote formulaic stuff, the word count, the genre, the title, who you are, a quick, like, 2 sentence biography. If there's anything about your background that makes you specifically qualified to write a book like this, an agent tends to be interested in that. If you're selling a book that's a novel set on a whaling ship and you studied whaling for 12 years, that might be an interesting fact. And then if you have any other publication credits, if you've had short stories or poetry or essays published, in a magazine or a newspaper, that can be nice to include. It shows, that you've been working on this and you have some skin in the game. It's not necessary, but it's a nice to have. And then yeah, you get in, get out, less than 1 page ideally.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I tend to, and this is like a little, I think very formulaically. So I like when Allison was talking about her like submission chart earlier, like I also work in charts. I work in, plug and play systems. So this might be a little more formulaic than a lot of writers want, but I kind of like to think of a query letter as a classic 5 paragraph, not essay, but dear agent, first 3 paragraphs are what I was talking about earlier, is that flap copy or that back cover copy that describe the book and sell the book. Then you have a paragraph about, A Tip for the Hangman is a 90,000 word historical fiction novel that a lot of people overlook comps in a query letter. I love using comps. I think comps are very important. I think you should definitely have comps in your query letter. It's short for comparable titles, and it is published books that you can point to and say, these are published books that are successful, and this is what my book is like. So, you could say it combines the fantasy world of Middle Earth with the thriller sensibility of Michael Connolly or something. And then say, kind of a little personalized line about why you're querying that agent. And then a little, as Allison said, like a bio. You really don't need, be honest with your bio. A lot of writers are afraid that if they don't have this storied background of short stories that they've published or awards they've won or whatever, or a creative writing BA, that their bio will not be up to snuff. It's really just to get a sense of who the author is and why they're writing that book. And as Allison said, if there's, if you yourself have been a dwarf going on a mythical quest to steal gold from a dragon, that could be important information for an agent to have. And then just ending with, thank you for your time. I've attached, every agent has some will just say first 5 pages, first 10 pages, first 3 chapters, first 50 pages. I've attached whatever as requested. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Like Allison said, it should fit in a page or so. That's not to say that if it goes over a page, a lot of it's online forms now, so we don't even know, but a page is just mostly for you to use as a guideline to kind of keep yourself reined in. Start with the most personal thing with a query letter for the agent. So that could be the book. The book could just be the way in. That's totally fine. If you, like Allison said, if the agent liked your PitMad tweet, or if you went to a conference and the agent said, I'm looking for, a queer rom-com set in the baking world, and that's your book, start by calling that out specifically. Start by saying, I'm querying you because you liked my PitMad tweet, or I'm querying you because, you said you were looking for this book and that is what this is, or I'm querying you because this client you represent is my favorite author and I I aspire to be like them. If you have a personal relationship to the agent in that way, start off with that. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And I would say a really good resource to use is, I haven't looked at this site in a long time, so I might be fudging the name, but I believe her name is Janet Reed and her website is Query Shark. And she is an agent, and she, with permission, all these authors gave her permission, she posts query letters that authors submit to her, and she writes about why that query letter intrigued her or why the query letter did not intrigue her. And oftentimes she'll post 3 or 4 iterations. She'll work on the query letters with the clients, and she'll post the different iterations as it kind of continues to be worked on. So you can kind of see how it evolves. And that is a really useful resource to see how an agent thinks about query letters, and what she bites on, and what she what doesn't hold resonance for her. So I would recommend, I am almost positive it's Query Shark. I think it's Janet Reed, but just type in Query Shark and that should pop up something.
Yeah, that's fabulous. We are past 8:15. I guess we'll stretch for a few more minutes if you all are still okay with that, and just do a couple more questions. Here's another practical question. Like, how many agents, Allison, did you query, and how many would you suggest querying? And John, maybe you have insights on that too. And do you do simultaneous submissions to agents? You know, Allison, when you were going through that, and John, if a writer does that, is that a bad thing? And yeah, what's that like?
Yeah, I think every writer I've ever spoken to has simultaneously queried multiple agents. The number of agents you end up querying is super variable. There are some people who send out query letters to 5 agents and 3 of them respond and ask for the full manuscript. I have friends who have sold wonderful, fantastic books who queried 150 agents before one responded. So it really can be any number, and it just depends. I mean, that's kind of that's my agent publishing mantra, is it depends. So it really it covers everything. I think I queried 19 agents. I think I did it in 2 rounds where I queried 10 and I waited. And I think I got several polite no's, and so I think most agents have something on their website that if you haven't heard back in 4 months, you can assume it to be a no. And so I waited about 4 months and before sending it out on an additional round. Um, I saw John nodding violently that simultaneous submissions are okay. The only thing that agents tend to want you to do is if you receive an offer from an agent, if they say, yes, I love your book, I'd like to work with you, and you have that manuscript out to 10 other agents, it is a nice courtesy and encourage to send those agents a note that just says, hey, I know you've got this manuscript on your desk right now. I've received an offer. Just a heads up. If you're interested in it, I'd love to hear from you in the next 2 weeks or so, just to give them the opportunity if they just haven't gotten to it because they get 500 manuscripts a day. They know this one's time sensitive. I should look at it now.
Okay, thank you. John, do you have anything to add to that end of things?
No, I mean, once again, just backing up what Allison said. I mean, I think that if you have one, like if there's one agent that is like your dream agent and who like represents all of the comp titles that you want your book to aspire to be, in that case, then like, sure, query just the one agent if you know that they would be head and heels above every other agent. You can do like a solo submission to them and see what happens and see if they respond. I think, otherwise simultaneous submissions are, as Allison said, incredibly common. And I think it varies person to person, as we talked about earlier with like how agents submit to editors. Like if you have 24 agents who you want to submit to, if you'd rather see what the first 6 say and if there's any editorial feedback to incorporate before going out of the next 6, some people like doing that. Some people just say the manuscript is done, blast it out to all 24. But I would say that an agent, when they receive a submission, they expect that it is simultaneous, unless it's specifically stated in the query letter, like, you are my dream agent, nobody else has this right now, it is only you. Every agent assumes that every query they receive is a simultaneous submission with at least one other agent, probably many more.
I have a follow-up question about etiquette as well in querying agents. Um, are you, is it considered okay if an agent in one agency declines? Can you query another agent in that same agency? Or is one agent from the agencies no, an agency no, if you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. Different agencies have slightly, if, I'll put it this way, if it's a no, if it's one no equals a no for the agency will almost always explicitly state that on their submission page. They will say something like, we shared queries with each other, or you know, we have one giant query inbox. Assume that we've all seen this if it's passed on. That will be explicitly stated somewhere. If it's not explicitly stated, then you can, it's totally okay to, you know, if you have 3 possible agents at one agency, to hopscotch along and to say, okay, this person passed, now we query this person, now we query this person. The only no is if you can't submit to 2 people at one agency at the same time. That's, you know, not a good thing to do. Sometimes you run into that situation with like a pit mad, where sometimes 2 agents from the same agency will accidentally, you know, like the same pitch. And in that case, I would just be upfront about it and send it to both agents and just say, FYI, both of you requested it. You know, both of you are having, you know, both of you are seeing this right now. And then it's up to the agents to confab with one another and say, mostly if one person, it's very rare that both agents will feel that burning passion to want to represent it. And if that happens, honestly, a lot of agents will co-represent it. But 95% of the time, what I've found is that if 2 agents or 3 agents like a pit mad and you send it to all of them, 2 agents will end up saying, this is not for me, and then it'll end up filtering down to just 1 anyway. So
Okay, excellent. I guess we'll do one more question, and this can be, and there are other questions that we didn't get to in the chat, all of which are excellent. But we'll wrap up with this one. Allison, you can answer it first from the author's point of view, and I don't know, John, if you, then you can weigh in. How do you know when your book is ready to query an agent? How do you know when it's done, quote unquote?
Oh,
What made you decide to start shopping a tip for the Hangman?
It varies for every author, and we all ask ourselves this every time, and no one really there's no magical sign that descends from on high that says this book is done and you can't do anything else to it. I think for me, I start to get a sense when I'm not making meaningful changes anymore and I'm just fiddling because I feel uncomfortable being done with something. And I start noticing myself making those kinds of edits. I'm not elaborating on a character's arc. I'm not fixing pacing. I'm not adding a new scene. I'm going to put this comma back in and then I'm going to take this comma back out. Or I'm going to open up the thesaurus and look for a new adjective because I'm not sure that one's quite right. At that point, I'm making changes that my editor is going to undo, my copy editor is going to undo. I'm making cosmetic fixes. And if I'm not changing anything that's going to change what the book is, that's when I know I need to have someone else look at this. Very often I'll have someone before my agent look at it. I have some other writers who I send manuscripts to just to give, like, it helps just to have someone else look at it and say, yeah, no, I enjoy this. It's fine. Send it to somebody else. Or this doesn't make any sense and you're way too close to this. You might need to look at this again. I tend to like to get 1 second opinion before I send it to my agent, but that fiddling stage is my flag to say someone else should see this.
yeah, I kind of generally operate in a rule of 3s. Not that's a hard and fast rule. I just, like I said, I like order and charts and things, and a rule of 3s sounds very nice. You know, if you're querying an agent, I would say read through it 3 times before you even send it to any, like if you're writing a first draft, I would say read through it 3 times before you even send it out. And if you're reading it 3 times and by the 3rd time you're like, I have no changes, this is perfect, I love my book, that's fantastic. And then in your writing community, I would say if you have the possibility to send it to 3 beta readers or 3 friends in the writing community and get their feedback on it and incorporate their feedback into the manuscript, then that is, another valuable step. But you definitely should not be querying an agent unless you have read through your manuscript at least 3 times. If you're still making change, and like Allison said, there's a difference between cosmetic changes that you're just doing to, maybe psychologically to put off making that, pulling the trigger, and like stuff with character arcs and adding in a scene and the pacing of the book. If you're still tinkering with pacing and arcs and stuff, it's not ready for an agent. And just make sure that you have at least like 1 or 2 other people in your life. They don't have to be authors themselves. It can be your mom or your sister or your your frenemy from college who is reading this and saying and providing feedback. But you want to make sure you have that external opinion when you are submitting to an agent. Certainly everyone needs that external opinion. I mean, I don't do as much of my own writing as I used to, but I still do some of my own writing, and I have major blind spots in my own writing that I cannot catch myself. I am a professional agent. I'm a professional editor who works in the New York publishing industry, and I miss major things about my own work because I have blind spots about my own work. You need that external source and that feedback to point out where your blind spots are. As an agent, when I'm editing a book, it's again, that's my rule of 3. Like I usually will do 3 passes on something, and if it's at the 3rd pass and there are still major problems, it's either ready by the 3rd round of edits you do, or you look at it and you go, look, we've done 3 rounds of this, you and I, it's still not ready. Maybe we should think about kind of putting this to the side and focusing on another project. And again, that just comes from working on commission and kind of thinking, are we going to do 6 different versions of this before it's ready? And can I spend the time doing that? So yeah, rule of 3. In short, rule of 3.
Well, one of the questioners said they were looking forward to the Frenemy podcast and wanted to know when that was going to go live. But listen, as a way to say goodbye to our audience, John and Allison, could you tell us something about your next project? So Allison, what are you writing right now? What are we hoping to see from you next?
Yeah, I am 85% of the way through with revisions on a project that I am not super allowed to talk a whole bunch about because it's not done yet and my agent has not seen the finished project. But I am working on another historical fiction novel. This one's got some spicy bits of fantasy in it, and hopefully before too long I will have finished it.
I can't wait for the spicy bits. And of course, your novel is a tip for the Hangman, and everyone should check it out. John, thank you. Yes, it's a fabulous novel. John, what are you excited? Is there a project that you can talk about that you're excited about right now?
Can I talk about it? I mean, I
maybe you can't talk about it.
I probably can. I hate publishing Twitter where everyone's like, I have some fun, incredible news, but I can't talk about it right now. Because that's always like when I was on Facebook in middle school and people were like, I'm in a bad mood, but I don't want to talk about it. I'm always like, then just don't, publish it. So I'm always reticent about, I think I can talk about it. I don't think the client will watch this if I can't talk about it. I'm right now working on the proposal for a hopefully exciting narrative nonfiction book about the early years of the Disney Channel. So Lizzie McGuire and Even Stevens and all of that stuff.
You better send me a galley of that book when it's ready because I want it.
She's I will. She's a very good pop culture journalist who has spoken to a lot of the people before, and it would be the first book about that era of the Disney Channel, and we're working on the proposal now, and we will be sending it to publishers hopefully this spring, and I hope that somebody will buy it and that it will be ready. But that's like something that I'm working on right now that I'm very excited about.
That sounds like a great thing to bring us out of our pandemic, I don't know, blues or whatever. That sounds great. Fantastic.
I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Well, both of you, thank you so much for a great conversation that was fun and useful as well. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did too. You're fabulous. Thank you for being such great people, great artists, great professionals. And everyone out there in the audience, thank you so much for joining us and asking such great questions. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Coming.
Thank you.